cannot.
Okay. It's a pop-up that says, gives you a countdown for Camtasia.
Huh? Up at the top, it does say recording.
Yeah, that's BBB doing that part, but I have another recording going off to the side, and that's the Camtasia stuff. Welcome again to Module 4 of our Project Management, Learning Organization, and Organizational Development. This module is going to talk about the execution phase of a project and motivation and some other things, active learning. I'm here with Sean Quigley, naval person extraordinaire, mechanical engineer. And we're going to talk a little bit about, have an open and discussion on the execution phase of a project and the opportunities that you have with available to you to develop your team and the motivation of your team. Specifically, we're going to talk about the execution phase of a project. What does that really mean? We'll talk about the relationship between execution and measurements. We're going to discuss ideas for incorporating different organizational development and learning theories in the actual execution phase, and how these actions can increase the motivation of personnel. I think we might actually give them a couple of examples of how it hurts or demotivates personnel. What do you think, Sean?
We may touch into those areas. It depends on how things work out.
It's as much important of what to do to improve motivation as what not to do to erode any enthusiasm in your project team.
Yeah, that would be in line with Hertzberg's theories about motivation and hygiene.
So if we're looking at project management as a roadmap, we have already gone through the initiating phase. We've shown some things that you can do with your team and to bring them together and to actually vet the scope, as it were, uncover mental models and hidden assumptions that may be detrimental to your project. And essentially, any hidden assumption or assumption that's not voiced poses a risk potential to your project. We talked about that. We talked about the planning phase of inclusion. And now we're talking about the execution or the implementation phase. And if you look at that little arrow on the right-hand side, it's essentially a "You are here" button. And then we have control and termination. Those are the last two. And then we have a summary. So we have this one and three more to do. The execution phase definition: coordination of people, resources, directed at a set of activities to produce the results of the project, achieve the scope, the goal of the project. So during execution, we're going to be taking some measurements. We should have been planning out what those measurements would be all along. Those measurements are going to use for quality assurance activities to see if we're headed the right way, both for the product and for the project. The execution also gives us an opportunity to develop our team. If we remember our forming, storming, norming, performing from Bruce Tuckman, we understand that grabbing a group of people and saying, "Yea, verily, thou art a team," does not really produce a team. That's a collection of individuals that may one day be a team. But at present, there's a lot of things that haven't happened to produce a team. And sharing of experiences can help that. Go ahead.
John, one of the things we've talked about when we talked about the other modules and the development of a project and its planning phase and implementation phase is we talked about using those parts of the project plan to get through the majority of the storming and forming. So by the time you get to the actual execution, we are in the norming and we have drawn everybody in as shared members of the project.
That's right.
So we actually used the first two phases of the project to get through a lot of the storming and forming to be at norming by the time you get here.
Right.
And that's intentional and should be based in a lot of project planning, that by the time you get to execution, you should have developed your team. Now, obviously, during those first few phases, you don't have all the members on board.
Yeah. But now you would probably be getting additional members, which kind of upsets the apple cart. And if I remember, Tuckman suggests that when you change the team dynamic, as in add or detract or subtract people, then or reapportion work, then you run the risk of going back to some previous state. But
Yeah,
you're right.
The stronger your core team is, and what I mean by core is the people that had the initial onset of the project, or the pre-planning and the planning, the stronger that core has developed, the less effect that the additions during the beginning of the execution phase will have.
Yeah, I could agree to that. I could agree with that. And then there's, in the execution phase itself, we have opportunities for building. We're still sharing experiences,
Yes.
and along the way, and our team members should be still communicating with each other. And
yes, and once you've established a good communication pattern, like you would have to during your planning phase, when you bring someone in, they're commonly shown the communication expectation, right? Because you don't bring someone in and just drop them off. You would bring them into the group.
You probably shouldn't, but sometimes that does happen.
Well, if your core team is strong and has developed that whole internal network, when you bring someone in, they'll show the standard that the team has set.
Yeah.
Because they'll immediately try to get them to the norm of the team.
Yeah. And for me, that last one, expectation management in the execution phase, goes all in many different ways. It's not just the stakeholders or the sponsor of the project and managing what they expect and what the team can actually achieve, but it's when the team members understand what's expected of them, even to the tune of something that's measurable, then they know when they're trending in the right direction to achieve that, and they would know when they're in trouble and need some help. More importantly, they know what they're expected to deliver to the team, and if you're a member of the team, you don't want to let the team down. You get that vested interest in the results of the team.
Well, I believe we had a blog post on the communication of measures and how a thorough understanding of what the measurements mean by the team, because the core team that started the planning set out and said, all right, if we get to these points, this is a measure we don't want to be at. This is a good measure. This is what each one means. Okay, so the team set the value for the measure. Unlike most measures that occur in a project where it's a management down type measure where they say, if you get to 5, let me know.
Yeah.
And the people involved with the actual production of the item or the project go, what does 5 mean? 5 must be bad because management wants to know. So they assume what the meaning of it is. And then I believe your blog post that you talked about with the drive-through at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Was a good example of that.
I don't think we named it. And it wasn't McDonald's, but yeah, it was a drive-through where they, yeah, that's an interesting post. If you're listening to this, you should go over there and read that under the LOOD part of, it's the unintended consequences of measurements when you're people don't really understand why the measurement is there.
Yeah, that's always a bad thing.
Yeah, it ends up either some kind of active manipulation, or you don't really understand what's going on because the measurement is inaccurate. It doesn't really reflect what's going on. And if you're a manager, you kind of want to know the truth, not not a metric that shows you good if good is really defined as bad.
Yeah, the whole concept of red light, green light measurement is in itself flawed.
Yeah. Or as Einstein say,
Because,
it should be everything should be made as simple as it can, but no simpler.
yes, but when you default to red light, green light, you're not looking for a trend. You're looking for it's already happened and now we have to respond instead of trying to curb the issue before it becomes a major issue.
Yeah. A lot of time red and
Liken
green
it
turns
to,
out to be easily manipulated too.
yes, I liken it to trying to turn a large ship. If you, in the initial turn, it's easier to correct it. But once it's already past the yield point, trying to turn it from there causes a large dynamic. So you have to know more to it. And we discussed that in the last one that we did.
Yeah. So we're going to focus on expectation management, which is going to include communication, managing of communications. That's what you tell people, how you tell people, who needs to know what and why, and how they want to get it. And manage the stakeholders, which is understanding the various stakeholder inputs and trying to get those addressed and understood and addressed as best they can be addressed, where they can be addressed. Also, in execution, we're going to procure material. That's where the purchasing of prototype parts, in the case of a product development organization, may come in, or test equipment and things like that. It should be fairly obvious that with a poorly motivated staff, you don't stand a good chance of achieving your objectives.
Yeah, it's more than just motivation. I mean, you can have a highly motivated group of individuals that do not understand what they're trying to do, and they won't achieve their objective. Or if they do achieve it, it'll be ugly. And I'm sure most people that are listening to our training here have been involved in projects where there were very smart people involved and very capable and talented people, but they didn't know where the project was going. They knew a small piece of it. And just because they knew a small piece of it and not the entire project, it caused more tension and made the project harder.
Yeah.
We've talked about that expectation management and communications expectations. And we've repeatedly beat on the topic of systems thinking and systems understanding. In the last slide, you talk about stakeholders, and you got to look at it as each group within a project is a stakeholder.
Separately,
yep. So to the people before them that were working on the project and the people that are after them, it changes what your position as a stakeholder is. And you have to know it for the people that are giving you their portion and the people that are receiving your portion, and how a small change affects both sides of that.
The other thing about a firm objective is it's a concentration of force when those objectives are well articulated and your team understands that. This execution phase often requires adapting the plan. What's that saying? I forget, some German general, no plan survives contact with the enemy. I have spun that differently, that no project plan survives contact with execution. It's common knowledge that you plan it out in some way, but things do not go according to script. It's a project. It's dynamic. It's odds are good it's not going to go according to script. That doesn't mean planning is stupid. You still have to go through all that. Eisenhower. The plan is nothing. Planning is everything, for example.
Exactly. But in the planning itself is when the core team learns more about the system and how it reacts, because they have to delve into how it would respond in different areas to get the data for the weights and measures, right?
Yeah.
So
Now, when you say
the
system,
core team,
we're not necessarily talking about the product that's under development. When you talk about system in this case, you're talking about the system that delivers the thing, right?
yes, and it as a whole, because like any system and any mechanical engineer that knows how things work, there's always systems within systems,
Yeah.
right? The pump that moves the water through a closed loop system in itself is a system, because it has to have a motor or some means of rotation. It's got seals so it doesn't leak all over the place. I know this analogy is not about people, but it's the same dynamic.
Yep.
The testing group has its own system. That system makes up part of the design system.
Actually, I would submit to you that the mechanical and electrical systems, the stuff that you can easily calculate, that is the easy stuff compared to the people, which are dynamic and have a
Understood.
greater chunk of variation.
Just an example.
Yeah.
Understood. Just an example of there is more than one system, even in the simplest of systems.
Yeah, but
Unless there is only one person or one thing in that system, like a rock, you want to call a rock a system, that is the simple system, but there's always more involved to it, which is what we keep talking about with the systems thinking, the group and organizational and team learning or mastery, because we talked about those. Each one of those subsets has to be understood. And in the planning phase, when you're developing your metrics, okay, you learn more about each one of those subsystems, and learning more about it when you see a trend in your metrics, because like you said, no plan goes unchanged, even the best one. It gives you a better understanding of how to respond during the execution phase.
Yeah.
It also establishes that communications network that allows you to get input from the other groups to see if what you think is going to be a change is actually an intelligent change.
Yeah.
So what the guy on the production floor thinks doesn't actually equate to what the person in the testing or the person in the foundry thinks.
Yep. We also get opportunities for learning new things and growing intellectually with the company. Now, this is probably a strong point for you.
Oh, indeed. And this is in line with the, so we previously talked about Snaggy, where he had personal mastery. I think we, in the fifth discipline, this one falls right into the fact that we talked about group mastery and organizational mastery. So it's not just the person learning new things, it's the group learning new things, the project team, the subgroups within the project team take the opportunity to see what's going on and how, and I like bringing up the matrix, and you see the trend of what's going on. And you can take that and go, all right, we're trending to the right. We need to stay more center line. Bring the group in, the people that provide me what I need, and the people that I provide what they need. So the three steps, one before, the middle, and the end, or the after next step, and then determine what our actions can be. So you wind up with unintended consequences, which is an archetype we've discussed before.
Yeah.
Okay, so just the fact that you handle the situation that way, by bringing in more than just the immediately affected group, is into itself learning and growing intellectually within the company.
Yeah.
Because the number of projects you and I have been involved with, we've seen it where the group that is in the middle gets something from, let's say, Group A, provides Group B with an item. Okay? Group B says, it's not exactly what I thought it would be. I'm going to modify it without talking to A or talking to C. They modify it and send it on to Group C. And now the entire project comes to a bouncing stop because it's really off track.
Yeah.
Because they didn't think about the upstream or downstream changes.
Yeah, here comes a whole bunch of rework that wasn't accounted for and a whole bunch of time lost and all those other things that go with that situation.
Yep, and we talked about this too before, one of our other favorite people, loop learning. Woo-hoo. Loop learning is awesome. This is another great example of that, right?
Yep.
Instead of it being a single point, it's not a loop, it's a rock. Boom, there it is. Next guy, deal with it. I'm done with my part. It's always feeding back. And I believe in our module 2 discussion, we talked about the supplier thought pattern.
Yeah.
The groups within the project, the subgroups within the project always have to view themselves that way. The person who's handing it to you is your supplier, even if they're in your own company. Normally, you don't think of someone within your own company as a supplier, but they're supplying you with something.
Yeah.
The next person you're handing it to is your customer. So you have to look at it that way. You always got to give the customer what they need.
Yeah.
But the customer might not always know exactly what they need. And
That's
then
the goal.
let's go back to 2 slides ago, expectation communications. Right? We have to communicate what you need. And I like it. When you have a discussion with someone, I always say, when they propose something, the best question to ask, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, is, why do you think it's that way?
Yeah.
Why
What
do
makes
you
you
think
say
we
that?
need to do that?
Yeah. What's the rationale? What principle? What
Yes.
logical thing am I missing?
Yep, because you can hear something, somebody say something, but if you ask them why they think or believe it's that way, they'll provide you their viewpoint.
Yep. This is part of uncovering mental models, asking these
Indeed.
questions. Yep.
Yes, and what have I talked to you about? It's not a mental model, it's an open mental model. A mental model is the way your mind thinks right now without a conversation. When you put the word open onto it, it means you're going to listen.
Yep.
It's that listening thing, especially in some projects, with some project managers, our group-to-group communication can become very tenuous.
Yep.
But if you have a good establishment of your expectation communications, where there is a rapport established, it's easier. And so I've talked to you, it's been a while back, about Zig Ziglar, right? Great motivational speaker, great salesman, and he talked about what you need to do when you're talking to someone and you're trying to understand their position and get them to understand your position. Is one of the first things you need to do is establish a psychological reciprocity. You know, I'm trying to help you, and I know you're trying to help me, so you're both dependent upon each other to achieve both of your objectives.
Time to remove the combative part, the potential combative part.
Yes. So you got to establish that. And the way we're talking about the project in a OLOD fashion is you've done that from day one. From the time that you started analyzing whether you were going to accept the project or not. And we've done lots of posts on this where you may take a project even though your business case study says you're going to break even or lose $5.
Yeah.
If I'm break even and lose $5, but the opportunity for growth and development of both my organization and my subordinates and my people are high,
Yep.
monetarily, it may be a boon, but organizationally, it's the deal.
Yeah. The other thing we have is affiliation with the team. I once worked on a project where we're all sequestered in a small room, and it was a small group of people working on a local version of the product that was being done. It was a global product, and in the headquarters part of the company, they were doing the same thing. They had more people doing the work that this little team did, stuffed away in this little room. That was, in my mind, a real team because people knew what they were supposed to do. They did that, and they went actively looking for the problems when they came up, and aggressively went to solve those people. We even had our own team theme song. It was REM. It's the end of the world as we know it, because it looked really like this was going to be a very difficult project to do with the number of people we had. The expectations were high. And I would say that the performance of the individuals, I got to say, personally, my performance, I'd always do the best I can. But in this instance, I did the best I could, as even much longer than normally I would have, because I did not want to let the rest of the team down, knowing how up against the wall we were. You know, it's like playing a football game with a wrenched ankle. You won't dare take yourself out because you're not going to be the one person that drags the team down.
And so that's an example of a stage 4 team where the team and the end goal are more important than the individuals that make it up. That's where you're going from I'm great, you're not, which we've all seen that. Individuals that are part of a team will not hesitate to point out that they salvaged the day. Ooh, I'm great, I saved everything, which is a stage 3 person, and they usually network one-on-one because they're information brokers. When you get a group like you just discussed, that's a stage 4 team where it's, we're great, how are we going to go change everything else to make it be where and what we want?
Yeah.
And that tribal leadership where it talks about, which is kind of ironic because we're talking about communication, is that the words you use can change the entire mantra of your team and your organization. Instead of that I'm great, you're not thought process and the speech that goes with it, it's we're great, which is contagious. And if anybody, if you've been listening, has ever been involved with a group of people that are achieving some great thing, it quits being the I'm great, you're not, and starts being we're great, and that feeds to more, and it just seems to grow.
Yeah. I got to tell you, questions came from wherever they came from, and if the answers came from, and it didn't matter where the answers came from or the ideas came from. I was the lead of the team, and I made a couple of decisions that I just kind of shot from the hip. And they would, rather than just start going off doing that, they would ask me questions about why I thought that way. And I would blurt out the things that made me arrive at that conclusion. And sometimes those things weren't right. So I had to back up and go, okay, if that's not true, then this is the wrong thing to do. We need to figure this out again differently. And I think because as the team developed rather egalitarian, I was the guy leading the group, but it was not like that. It was not I'm the boss. It's nothing like that. It was, we're here to get this done, and I know stuff that can be helpful, and you know stuff that can be helpful that I don't know, and all these pieces of the puzzle have to go together to make this happen.
Well, in the tribal leadership book, that's one of the things they discuss is that the leader of a stage 4 or stage 5 tribe commonly does not view themselves as the leader. Because there's such a strong networking and everybody is trying to achieve their mission statement and their value statement, the leader, when posed a question, will commonly go, did you speak to what did the other people of that, say? So now instead of providing an answer, they're providing direction to the group.
Yeah.
So these people know what's going on. You need to talk with them instead of cutting them out of the loop.
Right. So those kind of affiliation with the team is another opportunity for motivation. Then all of these things, the communication, the fact that we're affiliated with the team, we have division of labor probably in some mechanism or division of responsibility within our project, and those interactions can facilitate team growth. I know you know things that I don't know, and I know what those are, so I'm going to go ask you those things. By dint of that, I will start learning some of those things.
Indeed, it'll increase your systems knowledge of that area. It'll also increase your networking and your mental model. So all these things they say about motivation and loop learning and organizational is basically, if you were to boil it down into its bare essentials, is just the dynamic of having a discussion. Instead of thinking that the world revolves around this small circle, you expand it. Which, in some aspects, it makes it more difficult.
Yeah, it can slow things down because you can no longer just move on your own. In the long run, it probably makes things faster because there's not a lot of rework and there's not a lot of going back over and doing stuff. And
but in my opinion, that you can't just make a decision, move on your own. It's not really true. It's you don't want to because you want to understand the effect of it.
Well, you can actually make a decision on your own a lot of times, but you'll pay for it.
Well, yeah, and it could be a good decision, but
you still might pay for it.
Yes. When you bring the other portions of the group or the team in, it allows for buy-in and the potential for seeing it further.
Yeah,
so
vetting of the idea.
4 feet in front of you, but in 3 feet in front of you, there's another individual whose expertise is 4 feet in front of that. So the 5 minutes it takes to, and this is just an analogy, the 5 minutes it takes to communicate with that other individual actually puts your plan 8 feet out in front, so the possible fallout is minimized.
Yeah.
But we've discussed this before. I mean, it's loop learning. So you run into a bump. Your project now is slightly off track. You bring in the groups that are associated with that section of the project, the that section, and then the post to that section. You go, we're seeing this. What do you think we should do? I think this. You have a good dialogue. You lay down a plan. You go, all right, well, if we do this, we should see this as a response. Oh, wait, if we say we should see something as a response, that's a measure.
Yes.
So now we know how to check it, right?
Yep.
So instead of having unintended consequences that we don't know, we're looking for what it could be and how to narrow it to where we want. So we implement, our group comes to a decision, we implement the plan to go forward. We've got another measure which replaced the first measure that told us we were slightly off track, but now it's the measure is further downstream. So we move toward that and we see where it's going. Because we took the time to discuss it, if we see it varying, we know what the change in the measure means, and we know how to respond to it.
Yep.
So your statement of, yes, it'll allow less pain on down the road, so you spend 5 minutes discussing it here, but it saves you a day or a month or a year, or whatever, how the project lays out down the road. So, and it's ironic. Then they use an analogy, slow is fast.
Yeah.
I used to think that was crazy when I was a young sailor, but they would say slow is fast. And I'm like, no, slow is slow.
Yeah.
And they go, no, slow is fast. What they meant to say is efficient is fast. And intelligence is fast. If you're doing it methodically, efficiently, and intelligently, you're moving at a slower pace than if you're just blasting through it, but the likelihood for a problem is less.
Yeah. When I was at UNCC, I rented a room in a house, and there was an old guy named Lou. He was he was an interesting character, and he always told me, make haste slowly.
Yep.
Yeah, he was a pretty interesting guy. So what happens when we take measurements, which are necessary, by the way, to figure out if we're actually doing the things we're accomplishing the things we are trying to accomplish, if our plan is lining up like our execution is. That's how you compare the plan to the execution, right? Theoretically, it looks like this. My plan says, in theory, I can do these things. But in reality, those things might not be congruent. So you take measurements.
This is exactly what we just talked about, because we talked about learning occurs when you take a measurement. We talked about the group establishing the measurements as a part of the first, the planning. We talked about how those measurements would shift as any measurement has a band to it.
Yeah.
Right? So as you see the trend shifting toward one side or the other of that band, okay, you're figuring out what's causing it. You're implementing actions to bring it back in or shift the band, as the case would be. Sometimes your measurement, your assumptions that the group made initially on the measurements may be wrong.
Yep.
But a prime example of loop learning, and I think what we're trying to stress here is that the measurements need to be known by the whole project team, what their meaning is.
Yeah.
And whenever you run into a varying of the measurement toward either edge of the band or parameters that you have, you figure out what you're going to do and how the measurements should adapt to that when you're changing. So you're continually feeding back to the process.
Yeah. Either the process adjusts or the measurements adjust if the variations are too large or in a direction that you don't like. Right, or both. That's right.
And it's got to be fed back.
Yes. Otherwise, it's moot point to take the measurement. It's an open control system at that point. And what you really want to do is have a closed system where you understand the variation and can make some adjustments for that variation, either in how you do the work or the end result of the work.
Exactly.
Yep.
And when you're doing this, if you're applying loop learning to your project in a organizational and individual developmental way, when you make these changes to your weights and measures, you're capturing why they changed, what actions you took, so that the next group, when they go to plan a project, can be given that data.
Yeah, that's what this one kind of covers. That for this particular project, the measurements are going to help us understand the dynamics of this project for the important things. What's happening? Why is it happening? So we can figure out why it's happening and make necessary adjustments. What you just said is also this one. In our planning phases,
How will it affect the next plan?
right? In our plan, if we gather this key measurements, certain measures throughout our various project executions, we start to understand some things about the performances of our process and the capability of our organization. Those things are documented in CMMI. That's an interesting way to look at the processes in general, and where you would have control enough over your processes that you can more adequately predict the outcome.
Yeah, well, I think this feeds into lessons learned.
Yes.
And we had numerous discussions and posts about lessons learned, lessons unlearned, and how many organizations capture their lessons learned and they collect dust on a shelf.
Yes, at the end of the project when it's too late to do anything about it. Yeah, or it goes into a book on a shelf. Right. In this case, we're saying lessons learned should be happening during execution. They should be spread out amongst the team while you're executing. When you learn it, it needs to be spread quickly. Yes.
Yes, it immediately needs to be fed to the whole group. And commonly, it'll try to be isolated to one section of the project.
Yes.
So the mechanics down there working on it learned something. Even though the management team knows that they learned something, they go, thanks. How do you know that? Did you tell the rest of the group that the mechanics ran into something and this is how they dealt with it?
Yeah. And by mechanics, you mean?
So that's why whatever group.
The people doing the work. Yeah, the people doing the work.
Yeah. So you have to feed it to the group. And I keep saying that you should always involve 3 phases or 3 parts of your project whenever you bump into something, or you forecast that you're going to bump into it because your measures are going toward the
they're predicting. You're predicting or anticipating what's getting ready to happen because your measurements are telling you that.
Yes. So no problem only affects one group or one subgroup to a project.
Yeah.
It at a minimum affects 2.
Yeah, it has a ripple effect.
Affects many more, depending on how many groups you got involved with it.
Yeah.
So, and I'd like to break it down into the trifecta, right? There's performance, or people, processes, and procedures. There are 3 things that every subgroup to a project has. Don't do anything without a procedure. There's a process for implementing procedures and how people go about doing those procedures. And then there's the people that execute it all. Okay? So those 3 things are common to every subgroup of your project. So if you actually analyze what's going on that's veering you toward the edge of your measurements or where you don't want to go, you take the time to do a root cause analysis, you may find out that it's a process problem. And that process is common to maybe 7 different subgroups to your entire project. And they might not even be connected. It may be group B and group Y. They share a common process. Oh, group B, you found a flaw in that process. If you limit your communications, group Y will never know that process had an issue.
Yeah.
until they get there and start doing it.
Yeah. Or until the process is rewritten and they explain to them why it was rewritten, which probably never won't happen.
Yeah.
So those are kind of project related measurements, but quality assurance, we're looking more at the product and the project, but mostly the product in this case. We're looking at understand the quality of the product. We're going to have a certain set of quality assurance activities. We were joking around earlier. Anyway, we have a certain number of quality assurance activities that tell us some things about the product, and those quality assurances activities are going to come with a set of measurements on their own. And those measurements can also be milestones, prototype parts delivered, and things like that, or milestones that help us understand the level of the quality of the product and the project. For example, we have team member responsible for very specific parts of the quality assurance, then you have them taking the measurements and perhaps doing some interpretation on what that means in terms of the product's capability over time. Say a product is supposed to perform a certain way under some radiated field. It's supposed to be immune to some band of radiated EMI, electromagnetic interference. And for example, the team member that is responsible for this measure and interpret, they take the measurement, they run the test, take the measure, and they find out that there is an impact to the of the product to this EMI, but they interpret it as being rather benign because the nature of the performance is nothing that would hurt anybody or cause any harm. So that team member that did this is connected to this measurement, understands it, and he grows along in his knowledge along with the fact of this measurement and understanding it and having to interpret it. And where he can't, then he or she would have to go ask other people to help with that.
So unlike the measurements for performance of each subgroup or team or the overall project that are quantitative, these are hard and fast. Normally.
Yeah, normally, because they are very specific to a product. Yeah, they're going to be a lot more tangible, a lot more hard and fast.
And that's why many people have issues dealing with measures that are directly affected to people or groups of people. Because when you're trying to measure people or groups, it usually gets a reaction of judgment.
Yeah.
Which, if you, in just about every motivational thing that you can read, that whole judgmental thought process tends to affect motivation very badly.
Yeah.
That's why
in this case, you're judging a product, so the product doesn't really care.
That's right. These are ones that have no effect or little effect on the overall people that are developing and producing. But I thought this was a good point to bring out during this time that the measurements of people, you have to communicate very precisely. So one is the measurements for people and processes is kind of opaque, right? It's a nebulous. You have to be very good at communicating it and telling them that this is not directly a measure of you, it's a measure of how we are doing.
Yeah.
Whereas this measurement you're talking about here is I'm measuring how many gears are here and whether they work together. It's a yes or no. Simplistic measurement in its finest, even though it could be very complicated measurement,
Yeah.
it to itself is simple because it's either a good or bad.
Yeah, it essentially is mathematically capable of determining.
Yes, you
Factually.
can't do that with people.
No, you can't do that with people. Yeah. Although there are some implications here on people. Let's say that we're running these quality assurance activities and we find some product performance that is contrary to the documented requirements. It happens. The people who did the development, unless you handle this in a certain way, the people, when you go to report this to the development people, can take it that you're slamming them or making this judgment call on them because the product has failed in this way. So there are some tails that track to the people, but largely it's not related to people. It's related to the product.
Yes, and then that is the part you brought up is usually dealt with in the communications part, where you set that tone in the very beginning during your planning and your implementation.
Yep.
That you weren't going to be a combative.
Yep.
Because you can pose, and you and I had this discussion before about the way you say that car is red, or red car. And that's a poor example, but what I'm saying is just the voicing of it, the stating of it can instantly set off closing the door on a mental model.
Yep.
So you don't go back and say, this didn't work. What did you do? You go, and then example, the measurements show that this is affected by this.
Right.
How can we achieve the required parameters?
So how does this affect execution? Well,
we've talked about every one of these. We've actually talked about learning on the fly.
Yep.
Right? Because the situations will always change. The best laid plans of mice and men do go astray.
Yep.
Right? So we've beaten that one pretty good.
Yep.
Okay? We've talked about collaboration just like planning.
Yep.
Okay? We've talked about the groups, circling.
Because essentially learning on the fly is essentially a planning thing. Requires planning. So it would take us right back to the collaboration like planning, like you said.
Yep. All right, the alteration of this strategy or tactics of a project to meet the objectives, that feeds right back into loop learning, okay? That also feeds back into our communication, the continuous measurement adaptation. We've talked about that. You implement, or you're going to implement a change, changes the dynamics of your measurement, the parameters for it change because you've involved the group, the pre, the actual, and the post parties to it, okay? You're communicating your measurements and what they mean to the entire group and how it's adapted. So we've already discussed all these.
Yep.
And that brings up the point of no part of a project isn't embedded into these things. You look at it, loop learning. If you're going to have a successful project, you're always going to be loop learning, okay? You're always going to have the expectation communications. You're always going to be working on your systems knowledge and understanding, okay? Your mastery for your personal, your group, and your organizational mastery. And you can see how it just keeps feeding itself. Once you start doing it, it's like any loop, a wheel. What is the hardest thing to do with a wheel?
Get it started.
Get it started. Overcome the initial friction of motion.
That's called inertia, yeah.
that inertia. So you do that in the very beginning, in your planning and your implementation. you've got it rolling. Now, you keep tapping it. So by the end, it's rolling really good. And because it's rolling really good, the next group, which is probably going to be made up of some of the groups that you're currently using,
Yeah.
try to bring that momentum into the next one. So now you're not, the next project, you're not starting with a stationary wheel. You're starting with people that already, and groups that already want to do loop learning. They want to improve themselves, their processes, and their cohorts.
Yep.
So
All of these things in the execution phase have provide us with opportunities to further build the team. Problem solving, the simple act of finding the problem, trying to figure out what the best course of action to mitigate, avoid, avert, reduce the severity of impact to that problem, are communications and collaboration opportunities which help build the team. You understand people's levels of expertise, their area of expertise, and they start to understand everybody else's. This is also more mental model, open mental model exploration, assumption vetting, and things like that, also born out of these kind of opportunities. And more importantly, we have what's called team shared learning. I didn't just burn my hand on this stove. We all know that this stove was hot, and we're figuring out how to solve the problems of this hot stove. So next time we see a situation like this, I'm not going to be the only one that says that stove might be hot. And the rest of the team's going to say, yeah, that's probably not true. We're going to do this anyway. And then the rest of the team will possibly learn that that stove was hot. We will have already encountered that situation.
Yep, sharing the knowledge.
Yep. And then generate.
You and I have talked about this before. I always say, people tell me knowledge is power. And I tell them, nope, knowledge is a brick. So you can have lots of knowledge, lots of bricks, and they weigh you down. Or you can share that knowledge, you can share those bricks with other people who have knowledge, and you can build a house that can withstand anything.
Yeah.
So only when put to use is it power.
Yeah, so it looks a little bit like this. We're executing something. We're executing in our project. We have found some project obstacle, product obstacle. It really doesn't matter. There's something that's between us and our objective. We have taken that obstacle and explored it. Maybe use some Ishikawa diagram to try and find out why it could be this way, to uncover what could make this symptom happen. We may just do brainstorming. We may already have knowledge in our team that already knows why this happened in hindsight, right? So then you bring in your team together to figure these things out, and that offers a team a space for team learning, right?
Sure
That learning generates the possibility for some resolution, an alteration of the plan, or alteration of how we do the work, or both. And then we go back to project execution.
So when you look at it, right, this is obviously a loop learning thing, right?
Yep.
It's going to continually repeat itself. So execution of the project, you got your initial weights and measures right up in this area, right?
Yeah.
Run into an obstacle. Your group talks about it, determines the course of action, okay? You document what the problem was. You come up with a different course of action, which is right here.
Yep.
Okay. You got new weights and measures. You go back to executing the project.
Yep.
Okay. Those new weights and measures are validated in this section again. You'll inevitably run into another obstacle, and it'll start all over again.
Yeah. It might not be
So
another obstacle in this regard. It could be still associated with this, as in our corrective action or a plan or resolution did not quite work. Or it could be
exactly.
a wholly, entirely different thing.
Yep. But as it builds itself, it keeps looping, and it's not the same loop every time. It has the same basic pieces like this, right?
Yep.
But it'll come out further. That one will feed the next loop out here.
Yep.
So you're making progress, but you're continually learning and moving out.
And not just
Okay,
some part of
so
your team, the bulk of your team.
yes, so you're getting many things from this. You're getting systems knowledge, and not just a small portion system knowledge, the whole system, and you're sharing that with the entire group. Okay, you're getting mastery on the individual, the group, and the organizational level because you're sharing that and everybody's learning it and how to overcome it and the measurements that are associated with it. And as you're fueling that, because people are involved with it, you're motivating them because your favorite fellow for motivation, Maslow strikes again. You're moving up that pyramid, right? You can always be at the bottom. Any job, being part of a project will give you a check, and it takes care of your baser needs. Your little group that you belong to that's part of the sub-project gives you your sense of belonging to the little group. But it's harder to get to those next levels where you're working for something better. You're making the organization better. The organization is becoming better, and it's making the people better, which also plays into what they talk in tribal leadership, where when you hit that stage, you're no longer competing with another organization. You're now trying to make the community better. And the community not meaning the town. It could be, but in most cases it's meaning the community that you work in. So it's making people who make cars, they're going to make cars safer and better for the people who are going to drive them.
Yeah. Less expensive, safer, better.
Yeah.
More capable. Yeah.
So if you look at it, I mean, it's all built on the same basic principles. Okay, talking and learning. Oh man, I think we've talked about communications ad nauseum.
Yeah.
You did the one here about bidirectional, right? Yeah, we talked about it has to be open and free communication. And I always say that communication in one direction is not communication, it's an order.
Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily yield the best possible solution.
Yep, there are times when it has to be an order, and have been a sailor for 30 years. There are times when you have to say, go do this. It's not an open discussion item, and that applies to certain projects. You'll have to, at times, say, we don't have time for discussion. We need to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
But if your team is built correctly and has been openly communicating, when you do that, you'll get a better response.
Yeah, my experience is that a lot of people recognize that there are situations where the guy or gal who's the leader has to make these kind of decisions, and you just have to do right.
Yeah.
And
But the
if
good
you've been bringing them
communication,
along all along, treating them more as equals, these exceptions where you have to be an autocrat or authoritarian, then
I was
they
wondering if
understand.
you were going to touch on leadership styles.
There's going to be a time when you have to do that.
Yep. So and then I've always held to the opinion that there's only one real leadership style. That's all of them.
Yeah.
There are times when autocratic, laissez-faire, authoritarian, they all come into play. The key behind it is the leader knowing when
Yeah.
and the group understanding why.
Right.
And that's that last one right there, open communications, right? Facilitates team building.
Yeah.
That takes care of all those others.
Yeah, if your team's not worried about being stabbed in the back or making look bad, if you're helping them get where they need to go best that you can, then
Yeah, well, the term them, us, they, I always say is detrimental to good motivation. Whenever you talk about a subject or an item that involves the organization you're in, you always say we, because that entails you as well. Us makes it seem like there's a division. They, a division as well. But if you say we, it's more collective.
yeah.
And if you get a chance to read the tribal leadership one, and I've talked about this, the terminology of communications tailors what level of group you're going to have.
Yeah. I have that on my list of things to read.
It's an excellent book, but you have to read it segmentally. I'm going to go back. So when you read about level 1, level 2, when you read level 3, you go back and look at 2. It's kind of like Carnegie's fifth discipline.
Okay.
So when you first start reading it, he has you bouncing all over the book about the different archetypes and examples.
Yeah. So also in execution is procurement, which is gathering of material or ordering material. Material that you need to order, brainstorm solutions on how to accomplish the project goals, what things you actually need to order, how should you order them, what kind of contract types. You end up generating ideas for the whole procurement process, make buy decisions and things like that. You're going to manage changes and adapt the product to what is learned in the development. So those quality assurance activities that we were doing, where we were taking measures and understanding how the product performed, we would then make decisions on what that meant for requirements. For example, in our EMI example, we may say, yeah, the product deviates under this electromagnetic influence, interference, but that deviation is okay. So I'll change my spec to say the product can act like this in this band of EMI, and I find that acceptable. So that's changing the product documentation to meet what the product actually does. Another option is to change the product so that it matches what the document says. Those kind of things are managing changes to adapt the product and the learning that you've accomplished through the development. And you can learn from the process itself in your procurement process, the processes that are associated with your procurement. Perhaps the acquisition of the material is too long. Getting prototypes takes too long. Getting the orders out through your purchasing department may take an inordinate amount of time for this project. So you can look at the processes that generate those things and figure out how to improve them, which are more opportunities for team learning.
Yeah, so most people look at the procurement for a project as a separate portion of the project.
Yeah, probably do.
So you've got your material people, which I always
Yes.
thought was funny. They'll say that. The group will say it and they'll go, well, the parts people got me. Well, aren't they part of your team?
Yeah.
Aren't you feeding back to them what's going on, how it's affecting the system? So procurement is also part of all the things we've already discussed, the
Yeah,
system dynamics.
I've seen projects where the procurement guys know, for example, that the prototype parts have a 10-week schedule. All prototype carts in this category have a 10-week schedule. The project manager develops a project plan that says prototype parts will be on a 2-week schedule.
Were the parts people involved with the planning?
Apparently not, because they know it's 10 weeks.
So see, we've talked about that, involving your group, all your stakeholders in your planning.
Yep.
If they're involved in your planning, they've got a vested interest in your execution. So you can leave people off your team. You can run out there on the football field without your center. It may cause some drama. The hardest balance in it really is figuring out, because there's a break yield point, right? How many groups do you need to have involved in each discussion? We've all been involved with projects where they have too little, just the managers involved with the discussion.
Yeah.
And we've been involved with projects where it was the committee decision. People 15 steps downstream of where the problem is are all in a room,
Yeah.
giving input. Does it really need to be that far out that you're looking at it?
Yeah.
It might, but it might not. You have to be able to assess that, and your system knowledge is what allows you to assess it.
Right.
So,
each one of those two approaches that you said have their failure types.
yes,
Ultimately, both of them are going to lead to the probability of hitting your target at the cost you expected, in the time you expected, at the quality that was desired, with the scope that's required. But both of those two extremes make that almost impossible.
yes. So, like a teeter-totter, you got to find that happy middle.
Yep. And that brings us to the end, Sean Quigley.
Yes, it does, John. Well, I'd like to, for my part, leave you with the parting thought that knowledge only serves a purpose when shared.
Yeah. And when it comes to an organization growth and development, you want that knowledge to be shared quickly and as far flung as you can make it happen.
Exactly.
You don't want it in a book collecting dust. And with that, I would like to invite you to visit the Value Transformation website. Give us a call. We'll come teach you on these topics at your facility or some offsite, or even distance learning. We can set this up on Moodle like we're doing with this class. As contact information, this one down here is the most relevant. That's me, John Quigley, along with Sean Quigley. And visit our store if you have the time. Check out our books, blogs, games, and discussion boards, all for sharing of information and getting better at the things that we do. Thank you for sitting through this. Sean, as always, it's a pleasure. I look forward to the next one and doing this for many, many years to come.
Indeed, John.
Have a great evening. Bye, y'all.
You too.